I didn't hear the front door close behind me. All I heard was the rhythmic, scraping sound of metal against cloth. I had just stepped off a 6-hour flight, dragging my suitcase into the Westover Heritage Estate, a place my parents called a legacy and I called a bottomless pit. I walked into the dining room, expecting a hug or at least a hello. Instead, I saw my 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. She was on her knees on the cold hardwood floor. Her small hands were trembling as she rubbed a heavy silver cream pitcher with a rag. My sister Brianna's children were sitting on the chairs above her, their muddy sneakers resting on my daughter's shoulders as if she were a literal footstool while they played on their tablets. I stood frozen as my mother, Sarah, walked in and nudged Sophie with the toe of her shoe. "Rub harder, Sophie," she snapped. "That silver needs to glow for the reunion. You're a reminder of your mother's mistakes. The least she can do is earn her keep." The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it turned clinical. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my bags. I simply watched as my family branded my child with the same useless label they'd spent 30 years trying to pin on me. In that second, the load-bearing wall of my patience didn't just crack, it vanished. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Have you ever walked into a room and realized your family was actually your child's biggest enemy? I didn't offer them the satisfaction of an argument. I simply walked over, picked Sophie up, and felt her small frame shaking against my chest. I avoided looking back at the heavy silver or the smirking cousins. I guided Sophie straight out the front door, secured her in the car, and drove until the Westover estate was nothing but a fading shadow in my rearview mirror. By the time we checked into a hotel, Sophie was asleep, exhausted from a day of forced labor. I sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. It was 12:03 a.m. The silence of the hotel room was a stark contrast to the noise of my family's entitlement. I opened my private wealth portal. For years, I had been the invisible structural support in their version of a family. Since 2019, I had been paying the $4,800 monthly mortgage on that estate. Why? Because when my sister Brianna's boutique went under with a $120,000 loss, my parents were weeks away from foreclosure. They came to me in tears, calling me their savior, their responsible one. I believed them. I thought my money was buying us a bridge back to love, but as I stared at the active autopay status on my screen, the truth was cold and factual. My compassion had been a resource they'd exploited until the account was overdrawn. This wasn't a family home. It was a service agreement they expected me to renew indefinitely. My finger remained steady. I hovered the cursor over the Cancel All Future Payments button. I focused on the image of the mud on Sophie's shoulders. I replayed Sarah's voice, calling a 6-year-old useless. Click. The screen refreshed. Status. Cancelled. I didn't stop there. I triggered a payment cessation notice to the bank. I knew their grace period for this month ended yesterday. By morning, the bank's automated system would flag the account. The savior was officially off the clock. I leaned back, my eyes tracking the digital confirmation. I didn't feel the rush of heat that comes with anger. I felt the quiet, steady hum of a machine that had finally been recalibrated. I had been the primary beam holding up their roof, but they forgot one thing about structures. If you compromise the foundation long enough, the whole thing becomes a liability. I sat by the hotel window, watching the city lights blur into the rain. The bank confirmation email sat at the top of my inbox like a silent executioner. For most people, a home is a place of shelter, but for me, the Westover Heritage Estate had become a cage I paid to maintain. I started thinking about Brianna. 2 years ago, she decided she was a visionary entrepreneur. She opened a high-end boutique that looked like a Pinterest board and functioned like a black hole. She burned through $120,000 in 18 months. My parents didn't scold her. They didn't call her useless. They took out a second mortgage to cover her losses, and then they turned to me to pay the bill for their sacrifice. I realized then that my role in the family wasn't that of a daughter or a sister. I was the load-bearing shadow. In architecture, a load-bearing wall is the most critical part of the house, but it's also the one no one looks at. People admire the paint, the crown molding, and the expensive silver, but they ignore the wall that keeps the ceiling from crushing them. My family targeted me not because I was weak, but because my competence was a constant, silent insult to their failure. By making me the scapegoat, they could justify taking my resources while simultaneously resenting me for having them. They needed me to be the bad guy so they could feel like the victims in the house I was paying for. It was a perfect, parasitic trap. If I stayed and paid, I was the cold, career-obsessed daughter who was lucky they let me in. If I stopped, I was the heartless monster, abandoning my aging parents. But as I looked at Sophie, sleeping her small hands finally clean of silver polish, I realized the trap only works if you care about the opinion of the parasites. My family didn't miss me when I was away. They missed the security of my bank account. They didn't protect the quiet ones. They only protected the walls that echoed their names. I reached for my phone and dialed Nicole. She wasn't just my friend. She was the sharpest real estate attorney in the state. "Maya?" she answered, her voice sleepy but alert. "It's after midnight. Everything okay?" "I'm finished, Nicole," I said, my voice as steady as a structural beam. "Remember that project we discussed? The one involving Sovereign Bloom LLC? I want to move. Tonight. I'm not just stopping the payments. I want the title. I want the whole foundation." There was a long pause on the other end. "You're sure? Once we buy that debt and trigger the foreclosure process from the inside, there's no going back to Sunday dinners." I looked at the hotel mirror. I didn't see a daughter looking back. I saw a lead architect preparing for a demolition. "Sunday dinner was just a polite way of saying feeding time for them," I replied. "Let's start the paperwork. I'm ready to see what happens when the load-bearing wall finally walks out of the building." The vibration of my phone on the hotel nightstand at 6 a.m. wasn't a wake-up call. It was a declaration of war. I didn't even have to unlock the screen to know what was happening. Brianna had discovered the mortgage was unpaid. The notifications were rolling in like a landslide. "Maya, what the hell did you do?" Followed by "Mom is hysterical. Call her now." I scrolled past the texts to find the public shaming. Brianna had already posted a photo of the Westover gates on Facebook with a caption that read, "It's heartbreaking when someone's career success turns their heart to stone. Some people would rather see their parents homeless than share a fraction of their fortune." I watched the likes climb. I watched the comments from distant relatives calling me ungrateful and cold. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. In the world of social media, whoever screams the loudest is usually the one hiding the biggest lie. Brianna wasn't worried about our parents. She was worried about the boutique debt she'd been hiding in the house's equity. I arrived at Nicole's office at 8 sharp. She was already holding a thick blue folder. The bank flagged the account at 5 a.m. "Maya, just like we expected, the missed payment triggered a default clause because of the previous second mortgage Robert took out for Brianna's business. The house isn't just in debt. It's toxic." I sat across from her, my coffee untouched. "And the Sovereign Bloom LLC paperwork?" Nicole smiled a sharp, professional expression. "Done. We didn't just stop the bleeding. We bought the wound. Sovereign Bloom LLC has officially purchased the distressed mortgage note from the bank. For 20 cents on the dollar, you are now the primary lien holder of the Westover Heritage Estate." I leaned back, the weight of the realization settling into my bones. For years, I had been the daughter begging for a seat at the table. Now, I owned the table. I owned the chairs. I owned the very floor Sarah had made my daughter scrub. "What's the next step?" I asked. "As the owner of the debt," Nicole explained, "you have the legal right to accelerate the foreclosure or offer a settlement. But since they've defaulted on the terms of the original loan, you can also issue a formal notice of possession. Maya, you are essentially your parents' landlord now. And based on their credit score and Brianna's history, no other bank will touch them. They are completely at your mercy." I looked at the legal documents. I saw my name, hidden behind the corporate shield of Sovereign Bloom. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about the $4,800 a month I'd been throwing into a fire for people who viewed me as a utility. "Issue the notice," I said. But don't send it by mail. I want it hand-delivered. They're planning a victory dinner tomorrow night to celebrate the family reunion, the one I'm supposedly too busy to attend. I think it's time I made a guest appearance. I spent the next morning in the quiet hum of Nicole's office, but my mind was back in that dining room, watching my daughter polish silver. Nicole was scanning through a stack of historical bank records documents I'd never seen because they were always sent to my father's home office. "Maya," Nicole said, her voice dropping an octave. She slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. "We found a discrepancy while auditing the estate's secondary accounts. Specifically, the college fund you set up for Sophie 3 years ago." I frowned. I'd been putting $2,000 a month into that account. It was the one thing I kept separate, the one thing I thought was safe from the Westover rot. "What about it?" $40,000 was withdrawn 6 months ago, Nicole said. The reason cited was emergency medical expenses for a beneficiary. "But look at the authorization." I looked. The signature looked like mine at a glance, the same sharp M, the same trailing A. But as I looked closer, I saw the hesitation in the ink. It was a clumsy, desperate imitation. "My father," I whispered. The realization didn't hit me like a wave. It felt like a structural failure in a building I thought was secure. He stole from his own granddaughter to keep that house afloat, or maybe to fund another one of Brianna's visions. "It's forgery." "Maya," Nicole said firmly. "And because it involves a trust fund, it's a felony. We have the proof. This wasn't just a family being messy with money. This was a criminal act against a child." I stared at the forged signature until the letters blurred. I remembered Robert's face when I'd visited last Christmas. He'd hugged me and told me he was so proud of the strong woman I'd become. He was hugging me with one hand while the other was in my daughter's pocket. The last shred of guilt I'd been carrying, the tiny, nagging voice that told me I was being too harsh on my parents, simply evaporated. You can't negotiate with people who treat your child's future like a spare change jar. "Don't just issue the possession notice, Nicole," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long distance. "File a police report for the forgery. And add a clause to the eviction. If they want to avoid criminal charges, they vacate in 48 hours, not 72. No negotiations. No family talk." The Westover Heritage Estate was glowing with the kind of warmth that only my capital could buy. As I stepped out of the car, I could smell the expensive wood-fire grill from the patio. My family was celebrating. They were toasting to a legacy that was currently built on a foundation of unpaid debts and a forged signature. I didn't knock. I walked straight into the dining room. The sight was exactly what I expected. Sarah was at the head of the table, laughing as she poured wine into a crystal glass. Robert was at the other end, looking every bit the proud patriarch. Brianna was showing off a new designer handbag, likely bought with the money they'd skimmed from Sophie's future. The laughter died the moment they saw me. "Maya," Sarah said, her voice tight with a forced smile. "You finally decided to show up. We were just discussing how your absence has been." "Noted. I'm sure it has," I said, walking to the empty chair in the middle of the table. I remained standing. I placed a thick manila folder right next to Brianna's handbag. "But I'm not here for the steak. I'm here to close an account." Robert cleared his throat, his face reddening. "If this is about the mortgage payment being a few days late, Maya, there's no need for a scene. We've had some unexpected expenses." "You mean the $40,000 you stole from Sophie?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet level. The table went silent. Robert's fork hit the china with a sharp, metallic ring. Sarah's hand froze midair. Brianna looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I know about the forgery, Dad," I continued. "And I know about the default. But here's the update you didn't get. The bank didn't just flag the house. They sold the debt. To me." I opened the folder and slid a document toward the center of the table. "This is a formal notice of possession. Sovereign Bloom LLC, my company, is now the legal owner of this estate. As of 5 minutes ago, you are no longer homeowners. You are squatters." "You can't do this!" Brianna shrieked, slamming her hand on the table, You're evicting your own parents? Over a house? I'm not evicting my parents, I said, leaning in. I'm choosing the living over the ghost. For years, I've been expected to sacrifice my life and my daughter's future to maintain the ghost of a legacy that died the moment you started lying to me. I'm choosing Sophie. I'm choosing her safety, her education, and her dignity over a pile of bricks and your unearned pride. I looked at Sarah, who was finally beginning to look small. You told Sophie she was a reminder of my mistakes. Well, Mom, you were right about one thing. My biggest mistake was thinking that if I built a roof over your heads, you'd finally love the person underneath it. I'm finished correcting that error. Maya, please, Robert stammered, his voice cracking. We have nowhere to go. This house is everything we have. Then you should have treated the person paying for it with a little more respect, I replied. You have 48 hours to vacate. If you're not out by then, Nicole will move forward with the police report regarding the college fund. I think we'd all prefer an eviction over a felony charge, wouldn't we? I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't feel the heat of a bridge burning behind me. I felt the cool, crisp air of a life that finally belonged to me. The Westover estate was just a building, and I was finally moving out. The finality of a closing door is a sound you never forget. It was raining when Robert and Sarah showed up at my new home, a modest, light-filled space that didn't have a single piece of antique silver in it. Robert's hair was plastered to his forehead, and Sarah looked like she'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. They weren't screaming anymore. They were pleading. Maya, please, Robert said, his voice trembling. We're staying in a motel. Brianna, she can't help us. She says her accounts are frozen. Just one more month. Give us 30 days to find a place that fits our status. I looked at him through the screen door. He was still worried about status while standing in the mud. I didn't feel the surge of pity I expected. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet exhaustion. Status is a luxury for people who pay their own bills, Dad. You didn't have status. You had my stolen labor and Sophie's stolen future. We're family, Sarah wailed, clutching her damp coat. How can you sleep at night knowing we're in a roadside room? I sleep through until morning for the first time in my life, I replied. Because for the first time, I don't have to check the foundation for cracks. I'm not a load-bearing wall anymore. I'm just a person. I closed the door. I didn't lock it with a bang. I just turned the deadbolt with a soft, decisive click. 3 weeks later, the Westover Heritage Estate was sold. The proceeds covered the remaining debt, paid back Sophie's college fund with interest, and the rest went into a trust they couldn't touch. I didn't keep a cent for myself. I didn't want the ghost's money. Rejection is often framed as a tragedy, but as I sat on my new porch, watching Sophie plant marigolds in the dirt, I realized it was the greatest gift they ever gave me. Their rejection forced me to stop building a palace for people who wanted me to be the basement. It forced me to find my own soil. I watched Sophie throw an old, tarnished silver spoon, the only thing she'd brought from the estate, into the trash bin. She didn't look sad. She looked relieved. She looked like a child who finally knew her hands were meant for growing things, not for polishing the egos of the ungrateful. I opened my laptop one last time to look at the final accounting of Sovereign Bloom LLC. I stared at the numbers that used to represent my worth to them. Then, I hit delete. The screen went blank. The cycle was canceled. The house was gone, but for the first time, we were home. If you've ever had the courage to cut off a toxic situation to protect your peace, type "I am free" in the comments. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear that they are not the load-bearing wall for people who don't love them. Subscribe for more stories of justice and rebirth.